Alex Hayes had spent years believing he was in complete control of his life. Every decision was calculated, every move intentional. Nothing happened without his approval. But all of that changed the moment a little girl with familiar blue eyes looked up at him and asked, "Can you take me home?" At first, it was just an odd request from a child he had never met. But as he stared into those strikingly familiar eyes, a chilling realization settled over him. This wasn't just a lost child. This was his daughter. And he had never known she existed. Alexander Hayes had spent his entire life believing that success came from control. He had built his empire with calculated precision, ensuring that nothing ever slipped through the cracks. Every decision was measured, every risk was weighed, and every part of his life followed a carefully structured plan. He had wealth, power, and influence, and he saw no need for anything else. Family had never been part of the equation. At 36, Alex had convinced himself that he wasn't meant for attachments. He had tried love once, years ago, but it had ended in heartbreak. After that, he had thrown himself into his work, perfecting his image as a ruthless businessman, a man too focused on success to be distracted by emotions. He told himself that he didn't need anyone, that his world was complete exactly as it was. But all of that changed in a single moment. That evening had started like any other. He had just finished a business dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, finalizing a deal that would add millions to his company's portfolio. As he stepped out into the crisp night air, he barely paid attention to the city lights reflecting off his black Maybach, the luxury vehicle he had bought more for convenience than for show. He was reaching into his pocket for his car keys when he heard a small voice behind him. "Excuse me, mister." Alex turned, expecting to see a server or a valet. Instead, he found himself looking down at a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, her delicate features framed by thick, dark brown curls. But it was her eyes that made him freeze. Bright blue. Strikingly familiar. His pulse quickened as he stared at her. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at him, as if she knew him somehow. The girl hesitated, shifting her weight slightly before speaking again. "Can you give me a ride home?" Alex blinked, momentarily unsure if he had heard her correctly. A child, alone at night, asking a stranger for a ride, it didn't make sense. He immediately scanned the area, expecting to see a frantic parent running toward them, but the street was quiet. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice coming out sharper than he intended. The girl lowered her head slightly, her fingers twisting into the hem of her coat. "My mom isn't home," she said softly. "And I don't know my dad." Something cold settled in Alex's stomach. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who brought you here?" She looked up at him again, her bright blue eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. "My nanny, but she left. I didn't know what to do, so I waited." Alex exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. None of this was making sense. "What's your name?" "Lily," she answered. Lily. The name sounded soft and innocent, but it did nothing to quiet the unease creeping up his spine. He looked at her again, taking in every detail. Her dark brown hair, the slight curve of her nose, the delicate structure of her face. And those eyes. His eyes. He forced himself to push the thought aside. Coincidence. That's all it was. "Where do you live?" he asked. She gave him an address, and recognition flickered in his mind. It wasn't an upscale neighborhood, but it was safe. That didn't explain why a child had been left alone in the middle of the city, waiting outside a restaurant where she clearly didn't belong. Alex took a slow breath. He could walk away. This wasn't his problem. But something about the way Lily was looking at him, with quiet trust, with expectation, made it impossible to ignore her. He sighed. "All right. I'll take you home." Lily's face lit up with relief, as if she had never doubted that he would say yes. That unsettled him even more. As he helped her into the passenger seat, fastening her seatbelt, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. There were too many questions. Too many things that didn't add up. And as he pulled away from the curb, glancing at the little girl sitting beside him, he had no idea that this moment was about to change his life forever. The car ride was quiet at first. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her small hands resting in her lap, her legs barely reaching the edge of the seat. She didn't fidget, didn't shift uncomfortably like most children would. She just sat there, composed, as if riding in a stranger's car was the most natural thing in the world. Alex tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he navigated through the city streets. He had never been particularly good with kids, never had a reason to be. He wasn't the type to soften his tone or adjust his pace for anyone, let alone a 7-year-old girl. But there was something about her that kept his mind racing, a feeling he couldn't quite place. "You shouldn't talk to strangers, you know," he finally said, keeping his eyes on the road. Lily turned her head slightly, watching him with those piercing blue eyes. "I know. Then why did you ask me for a ride?" She hesitated, her little fingers gripping the hem of her coat. "Because you looked safe." Alex almost laughed at that. Safe wasn't exactly a word most people would use to describe him. Ruthless, intimidating, efficient, those were the words he was used to hearing. But safe? That was something new. "Your mom ever tell you not to get into cars with strangers?" "Yes," Lily said simply. "Then why did you do it?" She tilted her head, as if the answer should have been obvious. "Because you're not really a stranger." That made him glance at her, just for a second. "I'm pretty sure we've never met." Lily shrugged. "You just don't remember." A strange chill ran down his spine. He turned back to the road, focusing on the address she had given him. It wasn't far now. He needed to drop her off, make sure she got home safely, and then put this whole bizarre encounter behind him. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When they finally pulled up in front of a small, modest house in a quiet neighborhood, Alex cut the engine and turned to look at her. "This is your home?" Lily nodded, but for the first time, she looked hesitant. "What's wrong?" he asked. She bit her lip. "Mom doesn't like visitors." That didn't sit well with him. "You think she'll be mad you asked me for a ride?" She didn't answer right away, but then she whispered, "Maybe." Alex frowned. Something about her tone, the way she curled her fingers into the fabric of her coat, made his stomach tighten. He had dealt with enough people in his life to know when someone was hiding something. "You want me to walk you to the door?" he asked carefully. Lily hesitated, then nodded. Alex sighed and stepped out of the car, walking around to open the door for her. She climbed out, and he followed her up the small walkway leading to the front door. The house wasn't in bad shape, but it wasn't the kind of place he would have expected. There was no sign of luxury, no indication that the woman inside had once been part of his world. Before Lily could knock, the door swung open. A woman stood there, and Alex felt his breath catch in his throat. Rachel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with memories that had been buried for years. Rachel's eyes widened in shock, flickering between Alex and Lily. Her face paled as realization set in. "Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lily glanced between them, confusion written all over her small face. "Mom." Alex's entire world tilted. Because in that instant, with Rachel standing before him and Lily looking up at her expectantly, he finally understood why the little girl seemed so familiar. She wasn't just any child. She was his. For a long moment, Alex couldn't move. He couldn't think. The world around him blurred, and all that existed was the woman standing in front of him and the little girl at his side. The realization hit him like a physical force, knocking the air from his lungs. Rachel. His Rachel. The woman he had once loved. The woman who had walked away without an explanation, vanishing from his life as if she had never been there at all. And now, standing before him, was proof of what she had taken with her. His daughter. Lily shifted beside him, sensing the tension. Rachel's face was pale, her hands gripping the doorframe as if she needed something to hold on to. "Alex," she breathed, her voice barely more than a whisper. He hadn't heard her say his name in years, and yet it still had the same effect. A mix of longing, anger, and something deeper, something raw and unfinished. "You know him?" Lily asked, looking between them with wide eyes. Rachel swallowed hard, then forced a smile. "Sweetheart, go inside, okay?" Lily hesitated, glancing up at Alex. He could tell she didn't want to go, that she wanted answers just as much as he did. But after a moment, she nodded and stepped into the house. Rachel turned back to him, exhaling shakily. "Alex, I can explain." "Explain?" The word came out sharper than he intended. He stepped forward, lowering his voice so Lily wouldn't hear. "You can explain how I have a daughter I never knew about. You can explain how you disappeared from my life, took my child, and never told me." Rachel flinched, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me how it was," he said, his jaw clenched. She hesitated, then stepped back, motioning for him to come inside. Alex didn't think twice. He followed her into the house, his pulse hammering in his ears. The living room was small but cozy, decorated with warm colors and scattered toys. A family home. His daughter's home. Lily had settled onto the couch, hugging a stuffed animal as she watched them carefully. Alex felt another pang of something he couldn't name. She was trying to understand what was happening, just like he was. Rachel turned to him, wrapping her arms around herself. "I never meant for you to find out like this." "Then when?" His voice was low, controlled, but the anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. "When were you going to tell me, Rachel? When she turned 18? When she got married? Or were you just never going to tell me at all?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "I didn't know I was pregnant when I left, Alex." That stopped him. He stared at her, processing her words. "What?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something that looked like regret. "When we broke up, I didn't know. I found out weeks later, and by then, it felt too late. You had made it clear that your work was your priority, that family wasn't something you wanted." Alex opened his mouth to argue, but she continued. "I told myself I was doing the right thing," she said. "That if I told you, you'd feel obligated, and I didn't want that. I didn't want you to resent her, to resent me. So I convinced myself that she would be better off without you." His chest tightened. "You had no right to make that decision for me." Rachel exhaled shakily. "I know." Silence filled the space between them. The weight of 4 lost years pressed down on Alex's shoulders. He had a daughter. A little girl who had gone to sleep every night without knowing he existed. A little girl who had grown up without a father because Rachel had made a choice she had no right to make. And yet, as angry as he was, he could see the guilt in her eyes. The way she held herself, the way her voice wavered, she wasn't proud of what she had done. She had been scared. But that didn't change the fact that he had missed so much. He turned, looking at Lily. She was watching him carefully, studying him with the same quiet curiosity she had shown in the car. She had no idea how much had just changed. How much had just been revealed. "I want to know her," Alex said finally, his voice firm but calm. "I want to be in her life." Rachel's breath hitched. "Alex." He shook his head. "You've had 4 years to raise her on your own. But she's my daughter too. And I will not walk away now that I know she exists." Rachel hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This wasn't going to be easy. He had missed too much time, and there was no way to get it back. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. Because for the first time in his life, there was something more important than his career. And he wasn't going to lose her. The next few days were a blur for Alex. His entire world had shifted, yet he was expected to go about his life as if nothing had changed. Meetings, phone calls, contracts, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Every free moment, his thoughts drifted back to the little girl with bright blue eyes who had unknowingly walked into his life and turned it upside down. Lily was his daughter. His flesh and blood. And for 4 years, he had never known she existed. That reality weighed on him more than he could put into words. He had spent years chasing success, believing he was in control of everything, but this? This was proof of how much had slipped through his fingers. Rachel had agreed to let him see Lily, but she had made it clear that it would take time. He couldn't just walk into her life and expect her to suddenly understand who he was. She had lived 4 years without a father, and now she needed to ease into the idea of having one. It was frustrating, but Alex understood. He wasn't about to push his way in and overwhelm her. But he wasn't going to disappear either. So when Rachel texted him later that week, telling him he could come by to spend some time with Lily, he cleared his entire schedule. Nothing mattered more than this. When he arrived at Rachel's house, he hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door opened a few seconds later, and Rachel stood there, looking uncertain but not unkind. "She's in the backyard," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Alex walked through the house, taking in the small but cozy space. There were touches of Lily everywhere, crayon drawings on the fridge, a tiny pair of sneakers by the door, a bookshelf filled with colorful storybooks. It was a home. A home where his daughter had grown up without him. When he stepped outside, he spotted her immediately. Lily was sitting on the grass with a set of building blocks, carefully stacking them one by one. She hadn't noticed him yet. Rachel cleared her throat. "Lily, honey. There's someone here to see you." Lily looked up, her blue eyes meeting his. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to place him, trying to remember where she had seen him before. Then, recognition flickered across her face. "You're the man from the car," she said matter-of-factly. Alex swallowed, forcing a small smile. "Yeah. That was me." She studied him for a moment longer, then glanced at Rachel. "Why is he here?" Rachel crouched down beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Remember how I told you that sometimes families have surprises?" Lily nodded slowly. "Well," Rachel said gently, "Alex is a special kind of surprise. He's..." She hesitated, then looked up at Alex, giving him the chance to say it himself. Alex took a breath and crouched down so he was at eye level with her. "Lily," he said carefully, "I just found out something really important. Something I wish I had known a long time ago." Lily blinked, waiting. "I'm your dad," he said softly. Her small brows furrowed. She didn't speak right away, didn't react the way he had feared she might. She didn't cry, didn't run away. She just looked at him, her little mind working through the words. After a moment, she tilted her head. "But I don't know you." The words hit hard, but he had expected them. "I know," he admitted. "And that's why I want to spend time with you. So you can get to know me." Lily looked at Rachel again, and Rachel nodded reassuringly. Slowly, Lily turned back to Alex. "How?" Alex smiled. "Well, I could help you with those blocks. If you want." Lily studied him for a moment, then finally gave a small nod. "Okay." It wasn't much, but it was a start. He sat down in the grass beside her, careful not to disrupt her tower of blocks. She handed him one without a word, watching to see what he would do. He placed it on top of the stack, glancing at her to see if he had done it right. Lily inspected his work, then nodded approvingly. Not bad. Alex let out a small chuckle, relieved that she hadn't shut him out completely. Rachel watched from a few feet away, her arms crossed as if she was bracing herself for something. But there was something else in her expression too, something softer, something almost hopeful. They still had a long way to go. But for the first time, Alex truly believed they could get there. Over the next few weeks, Alex did something he had never done before. He rearranged his entire life for someone else. His days, once packed with back-to-back meetings, high-stakes negotiations, and business trips, were now scheduled around visits with Lily. He didn't care if his assistants were confused by his sudden availability in the afternoons or if his colleagues raised eyebrows at his newfound flexibility. None of it mattered. The first few visits were tentative. Lily was polite but reserved, treating him like a guest rather than someone she truly knew. She was cautious, watching him carefully as if trying to figure out what kind of person he really was. He couldn't blame her. He was a stranger to her, someone who had appeared out of nowhere and claimed to be her father. Trust wasn't something that could be forced, and he knew he had to earn it. He started small, following her lead. When she wanted to draw, he sat beside her with a crayon in hand, even though he had no idea what he was doing. When she wanted to play outside, he chased her through the yard, letting her win every time. When she asked him to read her a bedtime story one evening, something he hadn't expected, he sat by her bed, his voice softer than usual as he read page after page. Rachel watched it all with careful eyes. She was never far, hovering just enough to make sure Lily felt safe but never interfering. It was clear that she still didn't know what to make of him being in their lives, and Alex couldn't blame her for that either. He had spent 4 years absent, and now he was trying to make up for lost time. One afternoon, as they sat at the kitchen table coloring together, Lily suddenly spoke without looking up from her paper. "Are you gonna leave?" Alex's heart clenched. He set his crayon down, studying her face. "Why do you think I would?" She shrugged, still focused on her drawing. "People leave." He exhaled slowly, understanding more in that moment than she probably meant to reveal. She had been let down before. Maybe not by Rachel, but by others. Maybe she had been told that people would stay, only for them to disappear later. Maybe she was afraid he would do the same. He leaned forward slightly, making sure she could hear the certainty in his voice. "I'm not going anywhere, Lily." She finally looked up at him, her bright blue eyes searching his face as if testing whether or not she could believe him. "You promise?" It was such a simple question, but Alex knew it meant everything. He nodded. "I promise." Lily studied him for another second before nodding to herself, as if filing away his answer for later. Then, just like that, she picked up another crayon and kept coloring, as if she hadn't just asked him something that nearly broke him. That night, as he was getting ready to leave, Rachel walked him to the door. She was quiet at first, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "She likes you," she finally said. Alex glanced back toward the living room, where Lily's latest drawing sat on the table, a picture of the two of them, hand in hand. "I like her too," he admitted. Rachel hesitated before speaking again. "I was scared to let you in," she said softly. "I still am." He turned to face her fully, sensing the weight behind her words. "I get that. But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Rachel nodded slowly, as if finally allowing herself to believe him. It wasn't a perfect beginning. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for the first time, Alex knew he had something worth fighting for. Alex was starting to realize that being a father wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about showing up, again and again, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was messy. It was about consistency, about proving, through actions, not words, that he wasn't going anywhere. Every visit with Lily felt like another step forward. At first, she had been hesitant, treating him like an unfamiliar guest in her world. But as time passed, that hesitation faded. Now, she greeted him at the door with an excited smile, tugging on his hand as she pulled him toward whatever activity she had planned for the day. She started asking him things too, little things that seemed insignificant but meant everything to him. What was his favorite color? Did he like ice cream? Had he ever seen a dolphin? She asked questions the way kids did, with endless curiosity, but Alex knew what she was really doing. She was learning about him, piecing him together bit by bit, trying to understand who he was and if he was someone she could trust. One afternoon, Rachel asked him if he wanted to pick Lily up from preschool. It was a simple request, something any parent would do without a second thought. But to Alex, it meant everything. It meant she was trusting him, letting him take on something normal, something real. He arrived at the small school, feeling more out of place than he ever had in a high-stakes business meeting. Parents stood in clusters, chatting while they waited for their children. Alex had no idea how this worked, but before he could second-guess himself, the doors opened, and a flood of kids rushed out. Lily was easy to spot, her dark brown curls bouncing as she scanned the crowd. The second she saw him, her entire face lit up, and she ran toward him at full speed. "Daddy," she called out. The word stopped him in his tracks. She had never called him that before. His heart pounded as she reached him, throwing her arms around his waist without hesitation. He hugged her back, stunned, overwhelmed, but more certain than ever that this was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Did you have a good day?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Lily pulled back, nodding enthusiastically. "I drew you a picture." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, unfolding it with the kind of pride only a child could have. It was a drawing of the two of them, hand in hand. And for the first time, under his stick figure, she had written one word. "Daddy." He swallowed hard, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I love it," he said, meaning every word. That night, after dropping Lily off, Rachel lingered by the door longer than usual. She had seen the drawing. She had seen how happy Lily had been when she came home. "She called you Daddy today," Rachel said softly. Alex nodded, still feeling the weight of it. "Yeah. She did." Rachel hesitated before meeting his eyes. "You're really not going anywhere, are you?" Alex exhaled, knowing she wasn't just asking about Lily. She was asking about them, about the past, about whether or not he could really be the man she and their daughter needed. "No," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not." Rachel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." It was just one word, but he knew it meant everything. They weren't there yet. There were still things to work through, still time that couldn't be rewritten. But for the first time, it felt like they were on the right path. And Alex wasn't about to let go. Alex hadn't realized how much his life had changed until one evening, when he caught himself in an unfamiliar routine. He was sitting at the small dining table in Rachel's kitchen, helping Lily cut out paper hearts for an art project. His suit jacket was draped over the back of a chair, his sleeves were rolled up, and there were bits of red and pink paper scattered across the table. A few months ago, he would have been in his office, reviewing reports or on a late-night business call. But now, he was here, in a warm, lived-in space, surrounded by laughter and the smell of homemade pasta. Lily giggled as she held up one of the hearts. It was lopsided, but she grinned at it like it was a masterpiece. "This one is for you," she announced, pressing it into his palm. Alex looked down at the uneven heart, something tightening in his chest. It was just a small piece of paper, but it meant everything. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said, tucking it safely into his pocket. Rachel, who had been leaning against the counter watching them, shook her head with a soft smile. "She's been talking about this all week. You'd think Valentine's Day was a national holiday the way she's treating it." Lily gasped dramatically. It is. Alex chuckled, but his mind lingered on Rachel. She looked different tonight, less guarded, more at ease. He wasn't sure when it had started happening, but she had stopped watching him with suspicion. Instead of waiting for him to fail, she seemed to be accepting the fact that he was here to stay. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Alex helped Rachel clean up. It had become a habit, staying a little longer, making sure everything was settled before he left. She really loves spending time with you, Rachel said as she dried a plate. Alex met her eyes, setting down the towel he had been using. And I love spending time with her. Rachel hesitated for a moment before speaking again. You're really good with her. It wasn't just a compliment. It was an acknowledgement. A recognition of what he had become. I'm trying, he admitted. I know I can't make up for the time I lost, but I want to be the father she deserves. Rachel studied him for a long moment. You already are. The words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so much time proving himself, to Rachel, to Lily, even to himself, that he hadn't realized he had already become what he had hoped to be. Rachel sighed, placing the last dish in the cabinet. You know, I used to imagine this sometimes, she said quietly. What it would be like if things had been different. If we had figured this out before. Alex swallowed, stepping closer. We can't change the past, Rachel. But we can figure out the future. She looked up at him, something unreadable in her expression. And what does that future look like to you? He didn't hesitate. You. Lily. Us. Rachel let out a slow breath, and for the first time, she didn't look afraid of the idea. For so long, he had been trying to prove he was worthy of being in Lily's life. But now, as he stood there, looking at the woman he had never truly stopped loving, he realized something else. He wasn't just fighting for his daughter. He was fighting for their family. And for the first time, it felt like he might just win. Alex had spent his entire life chasing success, believing that wealth and power were the only things that mattered. But now, sitting on the couch in Rachel's living room with Lily curled up beside him, her small head resting against his arm as she drifted off to sleep, he realized that he had been chasing the wrong things all along. It had been months since that night outside Rachel's house, when he had first learned the truth. Months since his carefully controlled world had been flipped upside down by a little girl with blue eyes just like his. And now, he couldn't imagine his life without her. He had gone from being a stranger to someone Lily ran to the second she saw him. From an outsider to the person she trusted to tuck her in at night when he stayed late. From a man who had spent years believing he wasn't meant to be a father to someone who now knew he was meant for this all along. Rachel walked in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel, and smiled softly at the sight of Lily asleep against him. She's getting comfortable with you. Alex looked down at the little girl, warmth spreading through his chest. Yeah, he said, his voice quieter than usual. She is. Rachel hesitated for a moment before sitting beside him on the other end of the couch. There was still so much unspoken between them, so much history that hadn't yet been addressed. But the distance between them had lessened. The walls she had built weren't as high as they used to be. You were right, you know, she said softly. Alex turned his head toward her. About what? She exhaled slowly, her fingers absent-mindedly smoothing out the fabric of the couch. About me taking the choice away from you. About not telling you about Lily. Alex didn't respond right away. A few months ago, he might have reacted differently. He might have let his anger drive the conversation, reminding her of everything he had missed, everything he had lost. But now, after spending time with Lily, after seeing the way Rachel had raised her, after understanding the fear and uncertainty she must have felt, he didn't want to argue about the past. He just wanted to move forward. I wish I had known sooner, he admitted. But I'm here now. That's what matters. Rachel met his gaze, searching his face for something. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. You are, she said, almost to herself. You really are. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came when words weren't necessary, when everything important had already been said. Lily stirred slightly against him, shifting before settling again, and Alex instinctively placed a gentle hand on her back, steadying her. Rachel watched the movement, something unreadable flickering in her expression. She loves you, she said quietly. Alex swallowed, the weight of those words settling deep in his chest. I love her too. Rachel nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on him. Then, she reached for a blanket and carefully draped it over Lily's small frame. Alex didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know how long it would take for Rachel to fully trust him again, or what the future would look like for all three of them. But as he sat there, his daughter asleep against him and Rachel beside him, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going anywhere. This wasn't just a temporary moment in his life. This was home. The ending of this story is deeply satisfying because it highlights real emotional growth, redemption, and the power of second chances. Alex starts as a man who believes he has everything, wealth, power, and control, but in reality, his life is incomplete. His discovery of Lily isn't just about finding out he has a daughter, it's about realizing that success means nothing without love, connection, and family. What makes this conclusion powerful is its realism. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Rachel doesn't immediately forgive him, and Lily doesn't instantly accept him as her father. Instead, Alex has to prove himself through actions, not words. He has to show up, be present, and earn his place in their lives. By the end, he doesn't just claim the title of father, he lives it, fully and completely. Rachel's arc is just as important. She spent years believing she was protecting Lily by keeping Alex away, but she also carried guilt and doubt. Seeing Alex step up, not because he has to but because he wants to, allows her to let go of the past and start believing in a future where they can be a family. The final moment, where Alex sits with Lily asleep against him and Rachel quietly accepting his presence, is perfect in its simplicity. It's not a dramatic declaration or a rushed romance. It's quiet, steady, and full of unspoken understanding. It shows that healing takes time, but when love is real, it finds its way. This isn't just a story about unexpected fatherhood, it's about finding home in places you never thought to look. And in the end, that's what makes it truly meaningful. Richard Clarke had everything: power, wealth, control. He moved through life like a man untouchable, his world built on precision and logic. But on one bitter winter night, as he walked toward his car, a fragile voice stopped him in his tracks. "Sir, please, can I warm up?" He turned and saw her, a little girl, no older than 7, standing alone in the snow. Blonde hair tangled from the wind, blue eyes wide with quiet desperation, a worn-out teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. She was freezing. She was alone. And though he didn't know it yet, she was his. The bitter winter wind cut through the city streets as Richard Clarke stepped out of his office building, pulling his coat tighter around him. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the dark sky, covering the sidewalks in a thin layer of white. His polished black shoes left crisp imprints on the pavement as he made his way toward his car, parked just a short walk away. It had been another long day, filled with back-to-back meetings, negotiations, and the kind of high-stakes decisions that had made him one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. He was used to this life, one of control, precision, and unshakable authority. He had worked too hard to let emotions or distractions get in his way. Everything in his world was calculated, every move planned with purpose. He barely registered the cold as he strode forward, his mind already on the next day's agenda. That was until he heard something, so faint it almost got lost in the wind. "Sir." It was a small, fragile voice. He might have ignored it, might have assumed it wasn't meant for him, but something about the way it trembled in the cold air made him stop. He turned his head and saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, stood near the edge of the sidewalk, half buried in a snowbank. Her blonde hair, tangled and windblown, framed a face that was pale with cold. She wore a thin, oversized coat that did nothing to protect her from the harsh winter night. Clutched in her small hands was a worn-out stuffed teddy bear, its fur matted from years of love and wear. Her blue eyes, striking and eerily familiar, looked up at him with desperation. "Please," she whispered. "Can I warm up?" Richard felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. He wasn't the type of man to stop for strangers, let alone a child. The city was full of scams, and he had no intention of being drawn into something he couldn't control. But she was trembling, her breath coming out in small, visible puffs of air. The snow clung to her clothes, soaking into the fabric. And those eyes. There was something about them that made it impossible for him to turn away. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. For a brief second, she looked down at her teddy bear, gripping it tighter. Then she lifted her gaze again, and he saw the tears welling up in her eyes. "My mom is gone," she murmured. Richard's breath caught in his throat. The way she said it, soft, final, sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. The street around them was nearly empty. The office buildings had long since closed, their employees gone home to their families. There was no one else. No mother searching for her lost child, no frantic adult calling out a name. Just this small girl, standing alone in the cold, looking up at him with quiet desperation. Richard exhaled slowly. He could walk away. That would be the simplest choice. He had no connection to this child, no reason to get involved. But something inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him that if he left her here, he would regret it for the rest of his life. "Come with me," he said, surprising even himself. The little girl hesitated, then nodded. And as he led her toward his car, Richard Clark had no idea that his entire life was about to change forever. The drive through the snow-covered streets was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the car's engine. Richard kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the little girl curled up in the back seat. She held her teddy bear close to her chest, her small fingers gripping the worn fabric tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She was still shivering, though the heat from the car had already begun to warm the cabin. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her blonde hair was damp with melting snow. She didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going. She simply sat there, quiet, watchful. Richard wasn't used to silence. His world was filled with the constant noise of business, phone calls, board meetings, financial reports. Yet, in this moment, the quiet felt heavier than anything he had experienced before. He had acted on impulse, something he rarely did. Picking up a stray child off the street wasn't exactly in his nature. But something about her had stopped him from walking away. "What's your name?" he asked, breaking the silence. She hesitated before answering. "Lily." It was a delicate name, simple but full of life. He nodded, letting the information settle in his mind. "How long were you out there, Lily?" She shifted slightly in her seat, hugging the teddy bear tighter. "Since this morning," she murmured. Richard tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Morning. That meant she had been in the cold for hours, wandering the city, alone. He glanced at her again, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that was beginning to settle in his chest. "Where were you before that?" he asked carefully. Lily hesitated, staring down at the bear in her lap. "My aunt's house," she finally admitted. "But she told me I couldn't stay anymore." Richard exhaled slowly, a strange mix of anger and disbelief washing over him. "She kicked you out." Lily gave a small nod but didn't look up. He felt his pulse quicken. He had seen ruthless people in business, had dealt with those who would do anything for power or money. But this, abandoning a child in the middle of winter, was a level of cruelty he couldn't comprehend. Did she say why? He asked, keeping his voice calm despite the frustration simmering beneath the surface. Lily shrugged, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the seams of her bare. She said she didn't have enough money. That she couldn't take care of me anymore. Richard's jaw tightened. He had grown up believing that money could solve any problem. It was the currency of power, the answer to control. But hearing that a child had been discarded like an inconvenience because of something as trivial as finances made his stomach turn. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "What about your father?" he asked, though something in his gut already told him the answer. Lily shook her head. "I don't have one," she said simply. Richard didn't know why, but those words made something inside him twist painfully. He didn't push her for more details. Instead, he turned his attention back to the road, guiding the car toward his penthouse. He hadn't planned this, hadn't thought through what he was going to do next. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to leave her out in the cold. As they pulled into the underground parking garage of his building, Lily finally lifted her head, her blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Richard parked the car and turned toward her. "You're going to stay here tonight," he said. "Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." She didn't react right away, just looked at him with an unreadable expression. "Okay," she said softly. It was a small word, but it carried so much weight. Richard got out of the car, walked around to open her door, and extended his hand. For a moment, she hesitated, staring at it as if unsure whether to trust him. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. Her fingers were still cold, but her grip was strong. And as he led her inside, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far bigger than he had ever anticipated. The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet. Lily stood beside Richard, still clutching her teddy bear tightly. Her small fingers gripped the fabric as though letting go would somehow make everything disappear. She didn't fidget, didn't ask questions, just watched the illuminated numbers change as they ascended higher and higher. Richard wasn't sure what he expected from her. A child her age should have been frightened, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from the cold streets to the warm, sleek interior of a luxury high-rise. But Lily didn't seem scared, she seemed cautious, as if she had already learned that life was unpredictable, that nothing was permanent. When the elevator doors opened, Richard led her down a long, modern hallway lined with dark marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The space was pristine, cold in a way that reflected the kind of life he lived, one built on efficiency, not comfort. He opened the door to his penthouse, stepping aside to let Lily walk in first. She hesitated for just a second before crossing the threshold. The living room was expansive, with towering windows that revealed the glittering skyline. The furniture was sleek, expensive, but not exactly welcoming. The space was designed for meetings, for quiet evenings spent alone, not for a child. Lily took a few steps forward, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. She didn't say anything, just took it all in. Richard watched her carefully. "You can stay here for now," he said, slipping off his coat. "I'll figure out what to do in the morning." She turned to look at him, tilting her head slightly. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I need to find out where you're supposed to be. If there's anyone who can take care of you." There was no reaction at first. Then, Lily lowered her gaze, gripping the teddy bear even tighter. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said quietly. Richard felt something clench in his chest. He should have known she would say that. For years, he had believed that emotions were a distraction, that the best way to move forward in life was to avoid anything that made him vulnerable. He had walked away from attachments, from relationships that asked too much of him. Yet now, standing in his own home with a 7-year-old child who had nowhere else to go, he felt the undeniable weight of responsibility settle over him. "You're hungry," he said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Lily hesitated, then gave a small nod. Richard turned toward the kitchen, realizing how unprepared he was for this. His fridge was stocked, but only with things he could eat quickly between meetings: pre-packaged meals, protein shakes, imported coffee. He had never had a reason to buy anything meant for a child. Still, he pulled out what he could find: a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, some cheese. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage something simple. Lily climbed onto one of the stools at the kitchen island, watching him curiously as he cracked eggs into a pan. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "You live here alone?" she asked after a while. Richard glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Yeah." Lily rested her chin on the head of her teddy bear. "It's big." He smirked slightly. "It's supposed to be." She seemed to consider that for a moment before looking around again. "My mom used to say big houses get lonely." Richard's grip on the spatula tightened slightly. He didn't respond right away. He had spent most of his life convinced that loneliness was just another price of success, something unavoidable when you dedicated yourself to work the way he did. But hearing those words from a child, especially this child, made them feel different, heavier. When the food was ready, he set a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs and toast. Simple, but warm. Lily picked up the fork and took a small bite. After chewing thoughtfully for a moment, she nodded. "It's good." Richard let out a quiet chuckle. "You don't have to lie." She shrugged, taking another bite. "It's better than cereal." They ate in silence for a while, the quiet between them feeling almost normal. It wasn't until Lily finished her meal that she spoke again. "My mom made the best pancakes," she said softly, her fingers running over the edge of the plate. Richard looked at her carefully. He could see it now, the hesitation, the way she was testing how much she could say. "Tell me about her," he said, his voice quieter than before. Lily hesitated for a long moment before finally answering. "She was kind," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She always smelled like vanilla. And she sang when she cooked." Richard's chest tightened. He didn't have to ask her mother's name. He already knew. Anna. The woman he had once loved. The woman he had left behind. The realization hit him with the force of a storm. He looked at Lily, at her bright blue eyes, his eyes. He had spent his life believing he was free of the past, that he had moved on without regret. But now, sitting across from this child, the truth was undeniable. He hadn't just left Anna behind. He had left his daughter. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality that had just unfolded before him. The pieces of the puzzle had been there all along: the familiarity in Lily's eyes, the way her features reminded him of someone he hadn't seen in years, the quiet ache in his chest when she mentioned her mother. And now, there was no denying it. She was his daughter. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. He had spent years convincing himself that his past didn't matter, that the choices he made had been necessary sacrifices on his path to success. But now, sitting across from a child who had spent her life believing she had no father, that illusion shattered completely. Lily continued to play with the edge of her plate, unaware of the storm raging inside him. "She used to talk about you sometimes," she said softly. "Not a lot. But when I asked about my dad, she would say you were really busy. That you had important things to do." Richard's chest tightened. He could picture it now, Anna, sitting with their daughter, carefully choosing her words so that Lily wouldn't grow up hating a man she had never met. "She never told me," he finally said, his voice rougher than he intended. Lily looked up at him, her brows furrowing slightly. "She didn't?" He shook his head. "I didn't know you existed, Lily." If I had, he stopped himself. What was he supposed to say? That he would have stayed? That he would have been a good father? That he wouldn't have walked away? He didn't know if that was true. Lily studied him for a long moment before glancing down at her teddy bear. She must have been scared, she murmured. Richard frowned. Scared of what? Lily's small fingers traced the fabric of the stuffed bear. That maybe you wouldn't want me. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay composed. That's not true, he said, his voice firm. I didn't know, Lily. But if I had, I would have. He stopped again, because the truth was, he wasn't sure what he would have done. Back then, he had been consumed by ambition, too focused on building his empire to think about love or family. He had convinced himself that emotions were weaknesses, that ties to people only slowed him down. But now, looking at his daughter, abandoned and lost in a world that had already been cruel to her, he felt something shift inside him. I wouldn't have left, he finished, though the words felt heavier than he expected. Lily looked at him carefully, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. Then she gave a small nod and hugged her teddy bear tighter. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. Richard rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. His life had changed in the span of a single night, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what came next. But there was one thing he did know: he couldn't let her go back to the life she had come from. You should get some rest, he said finally, standing up from the table. There's a guest room down the hall. You can sleep there. Lily hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the large, unfamiliar space around her. Then she nodded and slid off the chair. Richard led her to the guest room, pushing open the door to reveal a neatly arranged space with a large bed and soft lighting. It was impersonal, like the rest of his home, but at least it was warm. Lily stepped inside, glancing around before turning back to him. Thank you, she said quietly. Richard hesitated before answering. You don't have to thank me. She gave him a small, tired smile, then walked over to the bed and climbed under the covers, still holding on to her teddy bear. Richard lingered in the doorway for a moment longer before finally turning off the light and stepping out into the hallway. As he closed the door behind him, he leaned against the wall, pressing his fingers to his temples. His daughter was sleeping in the next room. And he had no idea what to do next. Richard barely slept that night. He had spent years building a life where every decision was calculated, every outcome predictable. But nothing in his world had prepared him for this. His daughter, the child he never knew existed, was asleep in the next room. A little girl who had been abandoned by the only family she had left. A little girl who had spent the night in the freezing cold because she had nowhere else to go. And she was his. Richard sat in his office, staring out at the dark city skyline, his mind racing with questions. How could Anna have kept this from him? Had she really believed he wouldn't have wanted to know? Would he have reacted any differently back then if she had told him? Deep down, he knew the answer to that. The man he had been 7 years ago wasn't ready to be a father. Back then, he had been so consumed by his ambition that nothing else had mattered. He had walked away from Anna because he had convinced himself that relationships only held people back. But now, looking back, he realized just how much he had lost. As the first light of dawn crept over the city, Richard finally pushed himself up from his chair. He needed to figure out what came next. He made his way to the guest room, pausing in the doorway. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the bed. Lily was still asleep, curled up under the covers with her teddy bear tucked beneath her chin. For a moment, Richard just stood there, watching her. She looked so small, so fragile. And yet, she had survived more in 7 years than most people did in a lifetime. He wasn't sure what woke her, but after a few moments, her eyelids fluttered open. She blinked sleepily, her blue eyes hazy with drowsiness before they landed on him. Richard cleared his throat. Morning. Lily rubbed her eyes, shifting slightly under the blanket. Morning, she mumbled. Are you hungry? She nodded, sitting up slowly. Richard hesitated. He had never taken care of a child before. He wasn't even sure what 7-year-olds liked to eat. But then he remembered what she had said the night before. My mom made the best pancakes. That, at least, he could do. Come on, he said. Let's make breakfast. Lily slid off the bed, still clutching her teddy bear as she followed him to the kitchen. She was quiet, her small feet barely making a sound against the floor. Richard found the ingredients easily enough: flour, eggs, milk, sugar. He wasn't much of a cook, but pancakes were simple. As he measured out the ingredients, he felt Lily watching him closely. You know how to cook? She asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Richard smirked. I can follow a recipe. Lily climbed onto one of the stools, resting her chin on her hands. Mom never used a recipe, she said. She just knew. Richard swallowed hard, stirring the batter. He could picture it, their home, the way Anna must have stood in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked. It was a life he had never been part of. A life he had never even known existed. Lily watched him work, her blue eyes studying him with quiet curiosity. After a while, she spoke again. Are you really my dad? Richard froze for half a second before carefully setting the spoon down. He turned to face her, meeting her gaze directly. Yes, he said. I am. Lily didn't look shocked or upset. She just nodded, as if she had already known but needed to hear it from him. Do dads usually make pancakes? She asked. Richard let out a quiet chuckle. I have no idea. Lily considered that for a moment, then shrugged. Well, I think it's a good start. Something warm spread through Richard's chest. He had spent his entire life chasing things that he thought mattered: money, power, control. But in that moment, standing in the kitchen with his daughter watching him make pancakes, he realized that nothing had ever felt as important as this. He flipped the pancakes onto a plate and set them in front of her. Tell me if they're as good as your mom's. Lily took a bite, chewing thoughtfully before nodding. They're okay, she said. Not as good as hers. But close. Richard laughed. I'll take it. They ate in comfortable silence, the tension between them easing slightly. When Lily finished, she set her fork down and looked up at him. What happens now? It was the same question she had asked the night before. And this time, Richard had an answer. You stay here, he said. With me. Lily tilted her head. For how long? Richard met her gaze, his voice steady. As long as you need. Lily studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. Okay. And with that single word, Richard knew, his life had just changed forever. Richard wasn't sure how long it would take for life to feel normal again, but he knew one thing for certain: everything had changed. Lily stayed. The first few days were filled with quiet adjustments. She didn't ask for much, didn't make demands, didn't even seem entirely sure what to do with herself in such a large, empty home. She spent most of her time exploring the apartment, trailing her fingers along the sleek countertops, staring out at the city through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. She never strayed too far from her teddy bear, and she always watched Richard with quiet curiosity, as if trying to figure him out. Richard, for his part, wasn't sure how to navigate any of it. His world had always been structured, driven by routine and efficiency. But now, there was a child in his home, his child, and he had no idea how to take care of her. He learned quickly that 7-year-olds had habits, little quirks that he had never thought about before. Lily hated socks and kicked them off at every opportunity. She hummed absent-mindedly when she was focused on something, whether it was drawing at the kitchen table or watching cartoons in the living room. She ate her pancakes in a very particular way, edges first, then the middle, saving the last bite like it was a reward. And she asked questions. Lots of them. Some were simple. "Do you always work this much?" or "Why is your fridge so empty?" But then there were others, the kind that made Richard pause, made him wonder if he was equipped to handle this new reality. "Why didn't my mom tell you about me?" Richard had no answer to that. It wasn't until the fourth night that something shifted. He had been in his office, trying to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering back to Lily. She had gone to bed an hour ago, but something about the apartment felt different now, less empty, yet more fragile. He wasn't used to having someone else here, to knowing that there was a small person down the hall who depended on him in ways he still didn't fully understand. He sighed, shutting his laptop. As he stood and stretched, he heard it, soft footsteps in the hallway. When he stepped out of his office, he found Lily standing just outside her bedroom, hugging her teddy bear tightly to her chest. "Lily," he said, keeping his voice low. She hesitated, then shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "I had a bad dream." Richard wasn't sure what the right response was. He had never comforted a child before, never dealt with nightmares or fears that couldn't be solved with logic and reason. But as he looked at her, standing there in her two big pajamas, her blonde hair slightly messy from sleep, he knew he couldn't just send her back to bed. He walked over and knelt down so they were eye level. "Do you want to talk about it?" Lily shrugged. It was about Mom. Richard felt something heavy settle in his chest. "Do you miss her?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded, tightening her grip on the bear. "Sometimes I forget she's gone. I think she's just in the other room, and then I remember, and it feels like my whole body hurts." Richard exhaled slowly. "I know that feeling." Lily looked up at him. "Do you miss her too?" It was the first time she had asked him that, the first time she had acknowledged that her mother wasn't just her loss, but his too. Richard nodded. "Yeah," he admitted. "I do." Lily studied him for a moment before she spoke again. "Did you love her?" The question caught him off guard, not because he hadn't thought about it, but because he hadn't expected her to ask it so plainly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down on the floor, resting his arms on his knees. "Your mom was the best person I ever knew," he said finally. "She was kind. She was strong. And she believed in people in a way I never could." Lily watched him carefully, her blue eyes so much like his own. "Then why did you leave?" Richard swallowed hard. It was a fair question, one he had been asking himself for days now. "Because I was stupid," he admitted. "I thought work was the most important thing in my life. I thought I had to prove something to the world, and I didn't see what I was giving up." Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she shifted, stepping forward just enough to close the space between them. Before Richard could process what was happening, she climbed into his lap, curling up like it was the most natural thing in the world. He froze, his whole body tensing. But then, slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You're not gonna leave now, right?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Richard tightened his grip just a little. "No," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Lily let out a small sigh, her body relaxing. It was the first time since she had arrived that she let herself trust him completely. And for the first time in his life, Richard realized that success, power, and money meant nothing if he didn't have something real to hold on to. The following morning, Richard woke up feeling more exhausted than usual, but there was a strange sense of peace in the air, something he couldn't quite explain. He had spent the night on the couch, with Lily curled up beside him, her small body pressed against his as she slept. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but at some point, she had dozed off in his arms, and instead of carrying her back to her room, he had simply stayed there, holding her. Now, as the sunlight filtered through the massive windows, he carefully shifted, trying not to wake her. She stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep before clutching her teddy bear tighter. Richard sat up, running a hand through his hair, feeling a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. He had spent years believing he was untouchable, that nothing could pull him away from the life he had built for himself. But this little girl had walked into his world and, in less than a week, shattered everything he thought he knew. As he stood up, careful not to wake her, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He picked it up and frowned when he saw the name on the screen, David Calloway his attorney. Richard exhaled before stepping into his office and shutting the door behind him. "David," he greeted, keeping his voice low. "What do you have for me?" "I pulled all the records I could find on Lily's mother, Anna Williams," David said. "Her death was officially recorded 2 weeks ago. Cause of death was complications from an illness, cancer, from what I gathered. She was in and out of the hospital for almost a year before she passed." Richard swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a sharp ache through his chest. "And the aunt?" he asked. David sighed. "Not a great situation. Claire Williams, Anna's younger sister. She had legal guardianship of Lily after Anna passed, but from what I can tell, she barely kept the kid for a week before deciding she couldn't handle it. No official paperwork, no attempt to turn custody over to the state. She just threw her out." Richard clenched his jaw. The idea of anyone abandoning a child, let alone their own niece, made his blood boil. "Where is she now?" "Disappeared," David said. "No job on record, no fixed address. My guess? She was looking for a way to dump the responsibility from the start." Richard exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "So legally, Lily has no one." "No one but you," David said carefully. "Which brings me to the next part. What do you want to do, Richard? If you want, I can start the process of placing her into the system, finding a foster home." "No," Richard cut in before he could even think about it. "She's not going anywhere." David hesitated. "Are you sure? This is a major responsibility. You're talking about raising a child, Richard. This isn't business. This is life." "I know what it is," Richard said firmly. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he needed to do. "Then I'll get started on the paperwork," David said. "You'll need to establish guardianship first, but with the DNA confirmation and the fact that she has no other legal family, it should be straightforward. It'll take some time, but—" "I don't care how long it takes," Richard said. "Just do it." There was a brief silence on the other end before David let out a short laugh. "Never thought I'd see the day. The great Richard Clark, a father." Richard didn't bother responding. He ended the call and set the phone down, running a hand over his face. He had made his decision. Now, he just had to figure out how to make it work. When he stepped back into the living room, Lily was awake, sitting up on the couch, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Morning," she mumbled, looking up at him. "Morning," Richard said, walking over. "I need to talk to you about something." Lily blinked, her fingers still gripping the teddy bear. "Okay." Richard sat down beside her, turning to face her fully. "I talked to my lawyer this morning," he said, keeping his tone steady. "About what happened to your mom. About your aunt." Lily stiffened slightly but didn't say anything. "You don't have anyone else, Lily," he continued. "Legally, you don't have a guardian anymore." She looked down, her grip on the teddy bear tightening. "I know." Richard took a deep breath. "I want to change that." Lily looked up, her blue eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. "I want you to stay here," he said. "For good." She didn't react right away. She just stared at him, as if waiting for him to take the words back, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "You mean, you want to keep me?" she asked hesitantly. Richard's chest ached at the way she said it, as if she expected him to say no. "Yeah," he said softly. I want to keep you. Lily stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. Okay. It was just one word, but it was enough. And for the first time in his life, Richard Clark knew he had made the right choice. The following weeks were unlike anything Richard had ever experienced. His life, once structured and predictable, had become something entirely different. There were no more quiet evenings spent reviewing business reports, no more early mornings where the only sound in his penthouse was the hum of his coffee machine. Now, his mornings started with the soft patter of small feet on the marble floors, with sleepy voices asking for pancakes, and with the ever-present sight of a worn-out teddy bear tucked under a little girl's arm. Lily was still adjusting, and so was he. There were things he never thought about before: what time a child should go to bed, what kind of clothes she needed, what food she liked. It became clear quickly that she had never been given much choice before. The first time he took her shopping for clothes, she had stood in the store, staring at the racks of colorful dresses and sweaters, overwhelmed by the idea that she could actually choose something for herself. You don't have to pick just one, Richard had told her when he noticed how hesitant she was. Lily had looked up at him with wide eyes. I can have more than one. Richard's chest had tightened at that. You can have as many as you want. She had only chosen 3 things: a simple blue sweater, a pair of jeans, and a soft nightgown covered in stars. When he told her she could get more, she shook her head. I don't need more, she had said simply, as if the idea of excess was completely foreign to her. It was in that moment that Richard realized just how little she had before. Each day, Lily became more comfortable in his home, but there were still moments where he could see the doubt in her eyes. As if she was waiting for something to go wrong, for this new life to suddenly disappear the way her old one had. One night, he found her sitting in the living room, staring at the city skyline. It was late, past the bedtime he had set for her, but she was wide awake, hugging her teddy bear. You should be asleep, he said as he approached. Lily turned to look at him, then back at the window. I like looking at the lights, she said. Mom used to say they looked like stars when we couldn't see the real ones. Richard sat down beside her. She was right, he said, watching the way the city glowed beneath them. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice softer this time. Do you think she would be okay with this? Richard turned to look at her. With what? With me staying here. With you. His throat tightened. He had wondered that himself 100 times since Lily had come into his life. He had walked away from Anna all those years ago, left her to raise a child on her own. He would never forgive himself for that. But Lily was here now. And he wouldn't fail her the way he had failed Anna. I think, he said carefully, that she would want you to be safe. To be happy. Lily studied his face, as if trying to tell whether he really meant it. Are you going to keep me forever? She asked, her voice almost too quiet to hear. Richard's chest ached at the question. Yeah, he said. Forever. Lily nodded, as if that answer was enough. She leaned her head against his arm, letting out a small sigh. For the first time since she had come into his life, Richard felt something settle inside him. This wasn't just temporary. She wasn't just a child in need of a home. She was his daughter. And he was never letting her go. This story is about more than just an unexpected reunion between a millionaire and his lost daughter. It's a story of redemption, responsibility, and the realization that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Richard Clark starts as a man who believes he has everything, only to discover that he has unknowingly lost something far more valuable than power or wealth, a family he never knew existed. His journey is not just about providing Lily with a home, but about earning her trust, proving that he is not the same man who once walked away from love and responsibility. Lily, on the other hand, is a child who has already seen too much of life's cruelty. Abandoned, left to fend for herself, she has every reason to be wary, to believe that nothing lasts. Yet, despite everything, she is open to the possibility of love, of belonging. Her quiet resilience is what ultimately changes Richard, not through force, but through the simple, undeniable truth that she is his, and she deserves to be loved. The ending is not about perfection, it's about transformation. Richard does not magically become the perfect father overnight, nor does Lily instantly forget the pain of her past. But they choose each other. They choose to move forward, to heal, to build something real. And that is what makes this story powerful. It's not about a billionaire finding his lost daughter, it's about a father realizing that she was the one thing missing from his life all along.